The courtroom smelled of varnish and judgment. I was 56 then. Margaret Turner, widow, mother, and grandmother. Believer that silence could still protect a family's name. The morning sun struck the courthouse steps like molten glass, and in its reflection, I saw every year of keeping the peace. My hands trembled, not from age, but from knowing what the next hour might erase. My grandson Daniel stood at the witness stand. The same boy whose laughter once echoed through my kitchen was now a stranger rehearsing someone else's truth. I thought of home, the hum of the wall clock, the kettle's hiss, the scent of cedar from my husband's study. For a moment, warmth lived in those memories. Then it cracked. Betrayal has a sound, a faint tremor before it becomes a sentence. The judge cleared his throat. "Mrs. Turner, do you understand the accusations?" "I do," I said, though I barely recognized the world they came from. Daniel's eyes avoided mine. He spoke carefully, like someone reading from a script carved by guilt and influence. "She's not the victim," he said. "She orchestrated everything." His voice echoed off the walls, smooth, trained. Somewhere behind him, his father watched, silent, smug. I could feel the scent of polish thick in the air, sweet and nauseating. It clung to my throat as if the building itself wanted me voiceless. The prosecutor slid a folder across the table. "Institutional report, reference A17B9, he said. "Family trust discrepancies under your name." I looked at the papers, at the loops of a forged signature. My husband's handwriting was firm, mine softer. These were neither. "That isn't me," I whispered. "Then who?" The question was sharp enough to draw blood. For years I had chosen silence to preserve order. Silence when my son-in-law offered to manage the estate. Silence when statements stopped arriving. Silence when Daniel's visits became fewer, replaced by polite excuses about work, about distance. Every quiet choice had built this moment. The gavel struck once, sound without mercy. The judge spoke again, tone clipped. "We'll review financial statements next session. Until then, all assets remain under temporary audit." Temporary. Such a gentle word for loss. Daniel stood straighter, rehearsed confidence radiating from him. He wouldn't look at me, but his jaw tightened the way his father's did when lying felt justified. "Do you believe her unfit?" the attorney asked him. He hesitated. "I believe she's confused. She's grieving." Grieving? I nearly laughed. Grief was something honest, what I felt when burying my husband, not this humiliation paraded as concern. The stenographer's keys clicked like distant rainfall, capturing every wound in neat lines of ink. The courtroom light dimmed as clouds gathered beyond the glass. For a moment, I imagined the storm washing it all clean, the lies, the papers, even me. But storms don't come for rescue. They come to reveal what's already cracked. When the session adjourned, I remained seated. The bench beneath me smelled of varnish, same as years ago when I sat beside my husband during his civic hearings. He believed in fairness. He died believing our name meant something. The bailiff approached. "Ma'am, you can step out now." "I will," I said, but my body stayed still. Around me, voices blurred, legal jargon, shuffling shoes, metal against marble. Yet in that chaos, I heard Daniel's younger voice in memory. "Grandma, if I ever lie, you'll know, right?" I had answered then, "Of course, I raised you better." Now I wasn't so sure. Outside, photographers waited, lenses hungry for tragedy. The cold air hit my face like confession. Somewhere between the courthouse doors and the steps, I stopped being a person and became a headline. Still, I carried a vow within me. Quiet, but solid. I would not let lies rewrite my life. They could smear, forge, distort, but they would not silence me. He called me a liar before the judge. Trust lives in ledgers more than hearts. The hum of the counting machine filled the silence like a metronome of deceit. Each mechanical click felt heavier than the last, a rhythm marking not time, but the erosion of trust. I stood in the bank's private office, a room too polished for comfort, where even the air smelled of numbers and authority. The man across from me, Mr. Collins, the retired accountant who once balanced my husband's estate, sat with a frown that seemed older than both of us. He spread the statements across the desk, neat as confession sheets. "These withdrawals," he said softly, "weren't yours." "I never touched those accounts," I replied, the words tasting like disbelief. My husband had opened that trust to protect the family, to ensure Daniel's education, my security, the future we both planned. He adjusted his glasses. "The signature matches yours, but only at a glance. See this loop? It's deliberate mimicry." The sound of the counting machine hummed again, low and relentless, drowning the distance between guilt and proof. "How much?" I asked, voice steady, though my pulse argued otherwise. $53,000, he said, "withdrawn over 2 years." The number lodged like a splinter beneath my ribs, each digit a betrayal, each decimal a whisper of how easily trust becomes currency. I thought of the family dinners, the laughter, the toasts, the promises that nothing would divide us. I thought of Daniel's father, all charm and control, offering to handle the paperwork after my husband passed. That day, I had nodded with tired gratitude. I had wanted peace, not vigilance. Mr. Collins leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you pursue this, it'll open everything. Family cases devour themselves, Mrs. Turner. They always do." "I'm already devoured," I said. He sighed, folded the papers, and slid one toward me. "Keep this. Statement copy, reference B9H42. The pages rustled like autumn leaves. I heard the faint buzz of the ceiling light, a sound too sharp in such stillness. Betrayal has a tone, I realized. It doesn't shout. It hums just beneath the surface. Outside, the bank lobby gleamed with afternoon light. I passed tellers who smiled politely, unaware that my world had been itemized, signed, and stolen. The automatic doors opened with a soft chime, a sound that felt almost cruel. I paused on the steps, holding the document close. A passing breeze lifted the corner of the page, revealing my forged name again and again. Margaret Turner, written by someone who believed possession could rewrite love. The hum of traffic below faded into memory. I remembered the old keychain my husband had given me on our 25th anniversary, a small brass key with his initials etched beside mine. "To everything we'll keep safe," he'd said. I carried it still, though safety had long gone missing. I found myself whispering to the wind, "Why didn't I see it sooner?" But the question, like most regrets, had no answer that mattered. Back home, I placed the statement beside my checkbook, aligning the edges as if precision could restore order. The clock on the mantel clicked once, twice, reminding me that time doesn't pause for heartbreak. I picked up the phone, dialed my daughter, then stopped. What would I even say? That her husband had stolen from the dead? From me? From her own son's inheritance? The truth had weight, and I wasn't sure she was ready to carry it. The sound of the counting machine echoed in my head, steady as a heartbeat. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dim room, the paper glowing faintly under the last trace of light. Every betrayal leaves an arithmetic scar. Every trust, a zero waiting to appear. The account balance showed 0, the dead leaf trails sharper than knives. The lawyer's office smelled of dust and wax, the kind of still air that holds secrets too long. The candle on his desk flickered, as if it knew something was wrong. Papers waited in a neat pile, polished, cold, deceitful. The moment my eyes met the revised testament, the light burned harder, pressing against my eyelids like judgment itself. He adjusted his tie. "It's all in order," he said. "Is it?" I traced the edge of the document with my finger. The seal shimmered faintly under the candlelight. My name curved across the page, bold and deliberate, but not mine. Whoever had forged it knew my hand well enough to mock it. The lawyer cleared his throat. "This version supersedes the earlier will. It's notarized and filed." My voice came slow, measured. "Filed where?" He looked surprised. "With the state registrar, entry reference C4A1N2. Why?" The candle hissed faintly, as if answering for him. I reached for the envelope, the wax seal soft under my thumb, because my husband would never change it without telling me. Behind me, a chair creaked. My witness, Ellen, my oldest friend from church, leaned forward. "That's not her handwriting," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "Look at the T. She loops it lower. Always." I turned the page toward her. The ink had pooled slightly where the pen paused mid-letter, too heavy for my touch. "He rewrote our goodbye," I murmured. The lawyer hesitated, fingers steepled. "Mrs. Turner, if you're suggesting forgery, we'll need—" "I'm not suggesting," I cut in. "I'm seeing." The room dimmed with that truth. Candlelight became something surgical, carving shadows around every object, the envelope, the quill stand. The edges of trust turned brittle. Ellen reached for my hand, her palm cold. "You don't think Daniel's father—" I looked down, letting silence answer for me. The man had always seen legality as a weapon, not a shield. To him, paperwork was a form of possession. The lawyer finally spoke again, quietly. "If the changes were filed, there's a record. But you'll need verification through the registry itself. I can prepare a statement of concern." "Do it," I said, "and mark it urgent." He nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. Family matters like this, they rarely end kindly. Outside, rain streaked the window, blurring the city lights into ribbons. I caught my reflection in the glass. Tired, older, determined. I used to believe grief made people soft. Now I knew it made them sharp. Ellen squeezed my hand once more. "You'll need proof," she said. "I have it," I replied. "The truth is proof enough. The rest is just paper catching up." She smiled faintly, though her eyes said something else. Fear. The kind that recognizes how betrayal doesn't break from outside. It starts from blood. We stepped into the hallway, where fluorescent light replaced candlelight, harsh and unflattering. The contrast stung my eyes. For a heartbeat, I missed the dim warmth of the office, even if it hid deceit. "Will you be all right?" she asked. "I have to be." I tucked the forged will into my bag, the seal cracking slightly under pressure. A small sound, yet final. The corridor smelled of old paper and faint electricity, like the world had shifted its scent to match my resolve. I knew what came next: isolation. Every discovery is a kind of exile. The moment you name corruption in family, you're branded ungrateful. Yet silence was no longer an option. The stakes were clear. If I didn't fight this, my husband's name, our home, and Daniel's future would belong to the liar who had already stolen everything else. The elevator doors opened, spilling a flood of sterile light across the marble floor. My shadow stretched, long, thin, and uncertain. He'd signed love into theft. Every flower he planted had a price tag. Morning light spilled over the garden, soft and golden, pretending everything was still mine. I stepped outside barefoot, the earth damp against my skin. For a fleeting second, the scent of roses made me believe in peace again. Then I saw it, an envelope wedged beneath the mailbox, the paper stained with soil and truth. The notice inside was crisp, despite its dirt edges, the kind that slices when you unfold it too quickly. Property lien, the heading read, issued by the state registry. Reference L39F6. My hand froze halfway through the first paragraph. My home, my garden, secured as collateral for someone else's debt. The paper rasped against my fingers, its texture rough, almost alive. I could feel guilt in its grain. He had mortgaged the only piece of earth that still felt like love. I drove to the registry that afternoon, the letter clutched in my hand like evidence of a crime no one wanted to name. The clerk directed me to an office where a woman sat beneath shelves of thick binders, each marked with dates that defined lives. Her nameplate read, Arbiter Division. She looked up when I entered, calm eyes, steady voice. "Can I help you?" I handed her the document. "I need to confirm if this lien is valid." She scanned the page, lips tightening. "Was the property under joint ownership?" "It was," I said. "But my husband passed 3 years ago." Her pen stilled. "Then someone filed under the surviving trustee clause. See this signature?" She turned the paper toward me. "That's not standard authorization. It's self-assumed authority." The ink shimmered faintly under the fluorescent light. My stomach turned. "He forged my consent?" She hesitated, professional caution threading through her words. "I can't state forgery without verification, but it appears misleading." "Misleading," I repeated, letting the words sit heavy in the room. "He called it investment." She met my eyes, tone softening. "He called it provision. But the ground was already yours." Something cracked then, not loud, not visible, just an invisible tear between what I believed and what I knew. I thought of the afternoons he'd spent planting roses in neat rows, claiming it helped him relax after meetings. He wasn't nurturing beauty, he was decorating collateral. Outside the office, the sun had shifted, shadows longer, air warmer. I ran my fingers over the rosebush leaves in the parking lot, their edges smooth and alive. The contrast made the paper in my bag feel heavier, its edges crueler. Back home, I knelt beside the first rosebush he'd ever planted. The soil crumbled between my fingers, dark and honest. A torn red ribbon lay half buried there, faded now, once tied around a gift he'd brought when he promised new beginnings. I pulled it free, brushed the dirt away, and felt its texture echo the same roughness as the document. Different forms of deceit, same fabric. In that quiet, I whispered to the earth, "You deserve better men than us." The wind carried the words away, but the vow stayed. That night, I laid the lien notice flat on the kitchen table. The numbers were cold, definitive. 2 signatures, 1 forged. It listed an amount, $127,000, borrowed under the company's name, secured by the deed of my property, my garden, my sanctuary. The arbiter had offered to file a preliminary review, but I knew what that meant. Weeks of letters, legal phrasing, bureaucratic patience, time that liars use as shelter. I pressed my palm against the document. "Not this time," I whispered. In the window's reflection, the roses outside swayed faintly, silhouettes against the dim porch light. They didn't know they'd been sold. The texture of the paper scraped beneath my fingertips again, a constant reminder that signatures can wound deeper than words. I folded the document once, neatly, and placed it beside the old garden ledger where my husband had once written the names of every flower we planted together. Pages of life, followed now by a page of debt. The roses were collateral now. Rumors are just truths waiting for a pulse. By the time I walked into the market that Monday, whispers had already shaped me into something unrecognizable. People who once waved now lowered their eyes. I could feel the air thinning around me, cold, deliberate. The cashier hesitated before handing me my change, her fingers brushing mine as though madness might transfer through skin. Someone had spoken, and everyone had listened. Outside, a woman leaned close to her friend and muttered, "Poor thing, lost her grip after the money scandal." The words hit harder than any shove. I went home with groceries I didn't need just to pretend life was ordinary. The wind rattled the windows. The curtains swayed with each draft like a nervous witness. I poured tea, set it beside the same ledger I'd been collecting evidence in, and waited for calm. But calm never came. It called first. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. Silence. Then a soft male voice, careful and kind. "Margaret, you shouldn't fight this. People think you're confused. Let them handle it quietly." It was him, my son-in-law. The warmth in his tone was practiced, almost affectionate, but every word pressed like a hand to the throat. I hung up. The room felt colder. Even the tea had lost its steam. I stared at the window, where my reflection looked more like a stranger's accusation than a face. For the first time, I wondered if lies age faster than people. That night, I decided I wouldn't let whispers define me. I needed something solid, ink, formality, a record that said I wasn't imagining this. So I drove to the precinct before dawn, headlights cutting through fog, heart pounding like an old clock refusing to die. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed. A young officer stood behind the counter, posture straight, eyes wary. His badge read, Officer Grant. "I'd like to file a report," I said. He looked up from his tablet. "What kind of report?" "Defamation, harassment, a recorded message from my son-in-law." He hesitated. "Do you have proof?" I slid my phone across the counter. "Voicemail, reference ID 714D. He played it. The same calm, male voice filled the space. "She's losing it," the man said. "She's not well enough to handle finances." Grant paused the recording, then cleared his throat. "It's concerning." "That's one word for it," I replied. He began typing, the sound of keys filling the silence. The air conditioning kicked on, sending a sharp chill through the room. The temperature of the place seemed to mirror the distance between empathy and bureaucracy. When he finished, he printed the report and handed it over. "You'll receive a follow-up within a week. It might take longer, depends on evidence and statements." "I understand," I said, "but I need it on record that I'm aware. I'm not losing my mind." His expression softened. "Ma'am, no one said you were." "No," I said quietly. "But they will." Outside, the morning sun hadn't yet broken the fog. I held the report against my chest as I walked to the car. The paper felt cold through the fabric of my coat, as if even justice needed warming before it could serve. At home, I placed the document beside the teacup, next to the garden deed and the forged will copy. The stack was growing, a tower of truths waiting to be heard. The phone buzzed again later that evening. Same number. This time I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. "You're embarrassing the family." My hand trembled as I replayed it. Once, twice. His tone never wavered, smooth, almost tender. Manipulation spoken like care. When I returned to the precinct the next day to add it to my file, Officer Grant greeted me with the same polite restraint. He added a note to the report, then slid it across for me to sign. At the bottom, I noticed the annotation in neat handwriting. "Subject appears distressed. Possible elder confusion." The pen slipped from my hand. They wrote elder confusion in the notes. Silence measures guilt better than any clock. The house had stopped breathing days ago. Even the air seemed to hold its breath between ticks of the old mantel clock. That sound, steady, impartial, became my witness. Each swing of its pendulum marked another second of reclaiming what was mine. I had finally done it. I'd filed the restriction order that morning, my signature trembling across the legal petition, reference entry F91R2. The clerk stamped it twice, once for record, once for finality. The sound echoed, sharp, declarative. When I came home, the echo followed me. I sat in the stillness, feeling how victory could resemble loneliness. Every tick reminded me of the space he no longer had the right to enter. Boundaries, I'd learned, don't whisper. They hum like time itself. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. I let it ring once before answering. "You really did it?" His voice carried that same mixture of disbelief and venom. "You think a piece of paper will keep me out?" "It already has," I said quietly. He laughed. "You'll regret this." The line went dead, but his words stayed, circling the room like restless ghosts. When the protector agent arrived, a tall woman in a slate-gray jacket, she looked around the house carefully before sitting across from me. Her voice carried calm authority. "You've done the right thing," she said. "Boundaries hold when you name them." I nodded, the sound of the clock filling the pauses. "It doesn't feel like victory." "It rarely does," she replied. Peace never feels loud enough. We reviewed the report together. She slid a copy across the table. This is official notice. He can't contact or approach you within 100 feet. Violation is immediate grounds for arrest. The numbers felt unreal. 100 feet. Such a small measure of distance to separate safety from fear. After she left, I opened the drawer where I'd kept every document. The bank records, the forged will, the lien notice, the police report. I locked them away and turned the key. The click was soft but final. The drawer was no longer a grave for old trust. It was armor. Evening settled. The clock ticked louder in the emptiness. I could almost hear my husband's voice, steady and reasonable. You always knew when to draw the line. But this line wasn't drawn. It was signed, sealed, and enforced. By nightfall, the retaliation began. Envelopes slipped through the mail slot, unsigned letters folded in half. Fraud, one read. Elder abuse investigation, said another. They were copies of the same poison, typed by the same man who once toasted my birthday. I gathered them up, laid them beside the clock, and took a slow breath. The air had turned cold, each inhale edged with memory. I wasn't angry anymore, just aware. That's what power feels like after loss. Awareness sharpened into refusal. The next morning, I went to the station to log the letters. Officer Grant, the same one from the gossip report, took the papers and raised an eyebrow. Persistent, isn't he? Predictable, I said. He mistakes persistence for control. He nodded and filed the evidence. The folder slid into the cabinet with a dull sound. One more proof that silence could still build a case. Back home, I stood by the clock again. Its pendulum caught the afternoon light, swinging in patient rhythm. Realized it wasn't marking time anymore, it was measuring distance. Each second widened the space between his reach and my freedom. I whispered to the empty room, "This is how healing sounds." And the clock answered, steady as ever. But as I turned off the lamp, I noticed a shadow through the window. Tall, unmoving. It disappeared when I blinked, leaving only the reflection of the pendulum's motion. My pulse quickened, but I didn't step back. I closed the curtain, locked the window, and waited. He swore I'd regret the paperwork. Apologies arrive only when the damage is televised. I saw it before I heard it. The flash of a camera near the grocer's door, too bright, too close. The journalist stepped forward with the kind of politeness that hides knives. "Is it true you falsified documents against your own family?" I froze, groceries clutched tight, the world tilting slightly. "No comment," I said, but the words came out thin, fragile. He smiled as if that were confession enough. By dusk, my name was already a headline. I didn't need to click the link. The font itself screamed accusation. The headline read, "Matriarch faces fraud inquiry amid family feud." The article didn't mention the forged will or the stolen trust. It mentioned my instability, my sudden legal aggression, and a pattern of delusion. That evening, as I unpacked the groceries, I noticed the scent of burnt coffee rising from my sleeve. I hadn't spilled any, but the smell clung as if shame had a fragrance. I set down a cracked porcelain cup, one of the last my husband had chosen. Its handle broke cleanly in two when I tried to lift it again. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer. "It's me," said a calm voice. My old friend from church, now working as a media ombudsman. "I saw the article before it went live. You're not going to like what's coming." "I already don't," I whispered. "They're scripting you as the villain," she said. "It's deliberate. Spins like these feed clicks. They'll paint him as the patient son-in-law protecting family assets." "Protecting," I repeated, bitterness rising like smoke. "He's rewriting theft as duty." "He's good at it," she sighed. "He's giving interviews tomorrow." I sank into the chair, the cup fragments still warm beneath my palm. The smell of coffee grew stronger somehow, thickening the air with unease. I tried to steady my hands, but they trembled until one shard fell and rolled beneath the table. The ombudsman continued softly, I can file a correction request with the Press Council, reference entry D74C9, but it won't erase the first impression. People remember scandal, not amendments. Do it anyway, I said. Truth deserves at least one paper trail. There was a pause. Margaret, they're not after truth. They're after audience. Her words hung. They're like static. I stared at the newsprint folded on the counter, the ink still damp, my own face blurred by flash and shadow. I looked older in the photograph, more fragile, more everything they wanted me to be. I walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights hummed faintly, casting halos over the cars. Someone across the street was reading their phone aloud. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the rhythm of mockery. My name carried through the night air like a curse. For a moment, I wanted to shout back, correct the record, demand fairness, but silence felt safer. Silence had become my armor. The next morning, the calls began. Journalists, neighbors, one distant cousin pretending concern. Just tell us your side, they said, each one promising empathy and delivering intrusion. By noon, my voicemail was full. I listened to one message on repeat, a woman's voice, unfamiliar, asking, "How does it feel to betray your own?" I deleted it. Then another, then another. Later that day, I met my ally in a small cafe off Main Street. The place smelled of old beans and broken promises. She handed me a printout. "Here, they published a follow-up already. Public sympathies turning against you fast." The headline this time was shorter, crueler. Family fraud. Deepens. Matriarch under scrutiny. I laughed quietly. Do they ever get tired of feeding on what they create? She didn't answer. She just placed a gentle hand over mine. Stay calm. Legal actions being considered. But calm had become a foreign language. I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl of cream and bitterness fold together like truth and perception, indistinguishable once mixed. The spoon clinked softly, echoing inside the hollow where trust used to live. When I reached home, the broken cup still sat on the counter. I picked up both halves and tried to press them together, but the crack refused to disappear. No glue in the world could return its innocence. I turned off my phone, folded the article in half, and slid it beneath the drawer of evidence. My house smelled faintly of coffee again, bitter, grounding, relentless. By the time night fell, my name had become a symbol for scandal. Strangers debated my sanity while I sat in the quiet kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the heartbeat of humiliation. And there it was again, that same headline glowing from the tablet on the counter. The headline named me the thief. Numbers never lie, people do. The boardroom smelled of paper and polish, the kind that hides decay beneath order. I sat at the far end, the oak table stretching like a courtroom bench between memory and consequence. Stacks of folders waited in precise rows, their embossed seals glinting under the fluorescent light. The arbiter, the same woman from the land office, stood beside a projector, her posture calm, her silence deliberate. "This," she began, sliding the first report across the table, "is the full audit." The papers whispered as they moved, truth arranged in columns. I traced my finger along the margins, feeling the roughness of the embossed seal, the coarse texture of what honesty costs when printed. Numbers emerged like scars. $32,480 withdrawn. $11,200 redirected. $4,560 hidden. Total, $48,240. The arbiter tapped the calculator once. Ledger 4 confirms every transfer. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight. Around the table, 3 members of the audit board exchanged glances. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Arithmetic had spoken first. My grandson sat 2 seats away, eyes fixed on nothing. He looked smaller in this room, like the child who once asked me what fairness meant. I wanted to remind him. Instead, I kept my hands folded, my pulse steady against the grain of the table. The arbiter continued. Each transaction links back to the same secondary signature. Reference code B2 to 17A. That's your son-in-law's authorization. Someone coughed softly. The sound felt indecent in the stillness. I leaned forward. And the supposed beneficiary accounts? She flipped another page. Inactive. Empty. The words landed like stones in a dry well. No echo, just depth. He finally spoke. My grandson. Voice brittle. You don't understand. He said the funds were for the family? I interrupted, my tone sharper than I intended. That's what he always said? The arbiter raised a hand gently. Let's keep this procedural. Procedural. The word made betrayal sound like bookkeeping. The chairman of the audit board, a man with spectacles and tired patience, took the final document. This ledger speaks, he murmured. There's no interpretation needed. These are the numbers. I watched him stamp the official seal at the bottom corner. The sound of the metal press locking down was deafening. One firm motion, one irreversible truth. The arbiter turned toward me. Would you like to make a statement for the record? I hesitated. The stakes had always been the same. My name, my sanity, the legacy of a house built on half-truths. I exhaled slowly. Write that I never moved a cent without consent. Write that love shouldn't need signatures. Her pen scratched across the form. Behind her, my grandson stood abruptly, his chair scraping hard against the floor. You think this makes you right? He said, voice cracking under pressure. You think he didn't do this for us? For you, I said softly. Never for us. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Silence fell, measured by the ticking clock on the far wall. Even time seemed to hold its judgment. I gathered my folder, the embossed seal catching under my thumb. The surface felt uneven, like it had absorbed every lie spoken to protect him. The arbiter nodded once more, professional but not cold. This report will be submitted to the legal panel within 48 hours. After that, the case is no longer private. Nothing ever is, I replied. When I stood, the room seemed smaller. The air had thickened with the weight of acknowledgement. I looked at my grandson one last time, but his gaze stayed lowered, fixed on the table where numbers had become ghosts. Outside, the corridor stretched long and empty. I walked slowly, the report clutched to my chest. The pages felt heavier than paper, almost alive, almost breathing. At the exit, the arbiter joined me. You did well, she said quietly. Truth rarely feels like victory. I know, I whispered. It just feels inevitable. She pressed the door open for me. The hallway light flickered once, then steadied, a pulse returning after too long buried. Back in the boardroom, I could still hear the faint click of the stamp sealing the report. They stamped the report with his initials. Forgiveness drafted but never mailed still bleeds. I sat by the window, a stack of blank envelopes before me, the lamplight trembling across their pale surface. Outside, dusk folded into itself. Quiet, tired, honest. I'd spent years begging for understanding from people who never once asked how I survived them. Tonight, the silence had shape. It was permission. The therapist had said, "Write the letters, but don't send them. Let the words breathe without consequence." So I did. Each page began as an apology and ended as an awakening. To my daughter I wrote, "You deserved protection, but not the truth I carried. I gave you safety, not clarity, and both became burdens." The ink bled slightly at the edges. My hands shook, but I didn't stop. To my grandson I wrote, "You inherited loyalty, as if it were debt. It isn't." I stacked the pages side by side, their corners misaligned like the lives they represented. Under the lamplight, the glass pane beside me turned into a mirror. My reflection hovered over the paper, older, lined, but steadier than ever. I could see both women I had been, the one who kept secrets to keep peace, and the one who finally refused to die quietly inside them. The light pressed against the glass until it blurred my outline. It felt like forgiveness had a texture now, soft, uneven, real. I uncapped my pen again. This time, I didn't write to them. I wrote to him, the man who once swore that love and ownership were the same thing. You taught me silence. I unlearned it. You hid behind family pride. I dismantled it. And now, with every line I write, you lose the home you built out of fear. Halfway through, the lamp flickered. I paused, thinking of all the nights he'd read the paper aloud, his voice calm while the world burned behind our smiles. The memory was still too loud. I pressed the pen harder. The nib tore slightly through the paper. I didn't care. I reached for another sheet, but the protector, my caseworker, my ally through the order filing, had warned me, expression heals, but exposure reopens. Her words echoed, steady as the tick of that old clock across the room. Still, expression was all I had left. The letters grew heavier as I wrote, 7 in total, each sealed in thought, not envelope. The ink stains on my fingers looked like bruises. Maybe they were. I stopped when the candle beside me began to wane. The wax pooled unevenly, the flame bending toward the last page. I lifted it, watching the reflection of its light on the wet ink. The last letter wasn't addressed to anyone. It simply read, I forgive myself for not saving them all. I exhaled. The room seemed to shift slightly. Softer now, quieter. Even the clock had lost its sharpness. Then came a knock. Gentle, almost unsure. I didn't move. It came again. 2 taps this time, then silence. Through the window, I saw the faint shadow under the hallway light. He'd come. I froze, the letters still unsealed, the ink still drying. My first instinct was to hide them, to guard what little peace I'd built. But something in me refused. I rose slowly, gathered the letters, and slipped one into an envelope. My hands didn't tremble this time. It wasn't meant to be sent, but some truths refuse confinement. I walked to the door, every step echoing against the wooden floor. The house felt alive, breathing, waiting. I slid the envelope beneath the frame, its corner brushing the cold tile on the other side. For a moment I stood there, the lamplight behind me, the mirror's reflection fading in its glow. The flame dimmed, the air held still. One letter slipped under his door. He arrived carrying regret like a bouquet of thorns. I knew he'd come before I even saw him. The latch on the front gate hung crooked, the way it only did when someone forced it. Inside, the air had that strange stillness that follows intrusion. Too quiet, too aware. He sat in my chair, legs crossed, hands folded neatly, as if this were his home and not mine. The lamp beside him cast an uneven light across his face, half remorse, half calculation. "Margaret," he began, his tone honeyed but sharp around the edges. "This has gone too far. You don't need to make enemies out of family." I stood near the doorway, arms still trembling from the shock. "You broke into my house." He smiled. "I used the key I paid for." "You mean the key you stole?" I said. He leaned back, unbothered. "I came to talk. You filed things you shouldn't have. Protective orders, financial audits. Do you really think dragging our name through institutions will fix what's private?" "Private?" I echoed. "What you did wasn't private. It was theft. You turned our lives into ledgers." He stood, the chair creaking beneath the shift of his weight. "Withdraw the charges," he said simply. "You'll regret it otherwise." My chest tightened, the air thinning further. The temperature dropped. Even the clock on the wall seemed to slow. "Is that a threat?" He shrugged. "A promise. Family survives scandal, not courtrooms." "Family survives truth," I whispered. "Scandal only exposes what's already rotten." For a moment he looked genuinely hurt. Or maybe he just wanted to appear that way. "I did everything for you. For her. For the boy." "No," I said softly. "You did it for the mirror. You loved your reflection more than any of us." He stepped closer, the space between us filled with an old, familiar fear. You're going to destroy what's left of this family." I didn't move. "What's left is worth saving only if it's honest." His hand twitched, just once, toward the table where a vase once stood. Now it lay in pieces, shards glimmering like accusation across the floor. He must have knocked it earlier, but left it there, symbolic and cruel. "This house was built on loyalty," he muttered. "No," I said again. "It was built on silence, and I'm done keeping it." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned toward the door. "You'll wish you'd listened," he said quietly. I followed him only far enough to watch him go. The door frame shuddered slightly as it closed, the latch no longer catching cleanly. I waited until I could no longer hear his footsteps before reaching for my phone. The police officer arrived within 20 minutes, the same one who had handled the first complaint. "Forced entry?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Verbal intimidation, no physical harm." He took notes, methodical. "We'll log this under Incident Report 14C27. He's not to return without prior notice. You have every right to hold your boundary." "Thank you," I said, though my voice sounded distant, as if borrowed from someone braver. After he left, I walked back through the living room. The chair still faced the window, slightly askew. The vase fragments caught the lamplight, small constellations of what had shattered long before tonight. The air was cold, heavy. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, then sat in the same chair he had occupied moments ago. The cushion still held warmth from his presence, faint, invasive, lingering. I stayed there until the house settled again. The sound of the radiator returning to life hummed like a slow exhale. I realized then that peace isn't quiet. Peace is confrontation, without collapse. Outside, the temperature began to rise, not in comfort, but in defiance. I let the warmth reach me, slow and deliberate, thawing rage into clarity. I picked up the broken vase pieces and placed them inside a box, each shard aligned, documented, a record of what had crossed the line tonight. Then I closed the door fully, checked the lock twice, and whispered to the empty room, "This house belongs to Truth now." From the hallway came an echo, faint but certain, his parting words looping back through the night. He said, "See you in court." Justice walks in heels of hesitation. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and nerves. Rows of strangers whispered like wind through dry grass, waiting for spectacle disguised as justice. I sat near the front, hands clasped around a folded scarf, the same one I'd worn to every hearing since this began. It wasn't for comfort anymore. It was for memory. Across the aisle, he sat beside his lawyer, eyes forward, chin lifted as if innocence could be performed. My grandson, 2 seats behind him, avoided my gaze entirely. Blood has its own temperature when it turns cold. The judge entered, measured, deliberate, her heels striking marble with precision. The sound carried through the room like a metronome of authority. She spoke softly, but even that tone made people straighten their backs. "Proceed," she said. The prosecutor rose first. "Your Honor, we call the witness, the grandson." He stood, shoulders squared, expression rehearsed. "She's manipulative," he said, pointing toward me without looking directly at my face. "She twisted documents, turned family matters into public humiliation. She—" "Keep to facts," the judge interrupted. He paused, breath faltering. "She used her grief as a weapon." The courtroom murmured. I could hear every whisper, each one landing like pebbles against glass. The arbiter sat beside the bench, my ally through all the audits and sleepless meetings. She didn't speak, but I caught her small nod across the aisle. "Hold the ground you earned." When the judge called my name, I rose. The microphone stood taller than I expected. Its metal gleamed under the light, indifferent, waiting to translate truth into sound. I took a breath. The petition I filed wasn't vengeance. It was correction. Every figure, every signature, every transaction was reviewed by the audit board. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs.—" I cut him off. This is reference report A59B, signed and stamped by 3 officials, verified twice. He frowned, flipping through his notes. Those documents were gathered under emotional duress, were they not? No, I said quietly. They were gathered under years of silence. Someone coughed in the gallery. The sound echoed, small but sharp. The judge leaned forward. Continue. I unfolded the papers, the audit report, the petition, the receipts. The room filled with the sound of rustling sheets, each one heavier than the next. Here, I said, holding them up, are the withdrawals, $32,480, $11,200, $4,560. Total misappropriation, $48,240, all verified, each bearing his initials. Gasps rippled through the room. I felt no victory in them, only exhaustion. The lawyer attempted recovery. You're suggesting intentional deceit by your own family? I'm stating arithmetic, I replied, and arithmetic doesn't carry emotion. The arbiter rose slightly. Your Honor, she said, the records align with previous statements by Financial Review. The documentation is consistent with prior testimony. The judge nodded once, making a note. Her pen scratched steadily, rhythm unbroken, the sound filling every silence. My grandson covered his face with his hands. For a moment, I saw the child he'd been, the one who used to draw beside me at the kitchen table, his laughter spilling over ink and paper. But time had rewritten him too. I felt the scarf in my lap, the fabric soft between my fingers. I remembered stitching it the winter after my husband died. Grief had taught me to mend, not to break. The lawyer pressed on, desperate. You could have settled this privately. Privately? I said. Privately is how corruption survives. Privately is what let him believe love meant immunity. The murmurs swelled again. Someone whispered, She's right. Another hissed, Still family. I turned toward them. Family isn't immunity, I said, my voice low but carrying. It's responsibility. And when bloodline betrays justice, justice replaces bloodline. The room fell utterly still. Even the sound of the judge's pen paused. In that silence, the truth felt solid, unadorned, unashamed. The judge finally spoke. The witness may step down. As I returned to my seat, the scarf slipped slightly from my grasp and landed near the microphone stand. The bailiff bent to retrieve it, but I gestured for him to leave it. Let it stay where truth had been spoken. The gavel struck once, a sharp crack of finality. Recess, the judge announced. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The courtroom erupted into low voices, 100 private verdicts being whispered at once, some sympathetic, some cruel. The arbiter leaned close as I passed her. You did it, she murmured. No, I said. Truth did. But even truth trembles when it finally finds air. I stepped outside, the courthouse doors heavy behind me. The winter wind cut through my coat, but it felt clean, almost kind. Inside, the crowd still whispered. The judge called for recess, crowd still whispering. Some silences hold verdicts heavier than words. The clerk's shoes clicked softly against the marble as he approached. In his hand, a single folded notice, creased perfectly, untouched by empathy. He extended it toward me without expression. The air between us felt colder than the paper he carried. The court will reconvene tomorrow, he said. Evidence requires one more verification. His tone was procedural, but the pause that followed lingered too long to be neutral. I took the notice carefully. Its texture was dry, almost brittle, as if truth itself had to endure a kind of waiting before being declared. My ally, the witness who had stayed through every grueling session, leaned close. Delays are mercy's disguise, she whispered. They give the truth a longer breath. I wanted to believe her. The clock above the bench ticked once, then again, its rhythm stretching across the room like a verdict unspoken. Each sound seemed louder than the last. Time had turned into its own kind of witness, faithful patient, cruel. Outside, the crowd buzzed. Cameras waited for reactions, their lenses reflecting the fluorescent light like 100 unblinking eyes. Reporters murmured my name, waiting for a statement, a breakdown, a headline. I offered them nothing. Silence was my only armor now. I walked slowly down the courthouse steps, the notice still in hand. The wind caught its edge, flapping lightly, a reminder that justice, for all its weight, could still be moved by something as small as breath. Across the street, the arbiter stood near a parked car, speaking into her phone. When she saw me, she nodded once, professional, restrained. There were no assurances left to give, only process and patience. "You did what was required," she said as I approached. "Required doesn't always mean enough," I replied. She sighed. "Tomorrow isn't far." But it felt infinite. That night, the waiting took form. Every object in the house seemed to tick, hum, or breathe. The radiator hissed, the fridge clicked, the old clock in the hallway counted the seconds too loudly. I had never noticed how much sound lived inside silence until Justice asked me to sit with it. I placed the court notice on the table beside the audit copies and letters that had once been my lifeline. The paper caught the lamplight, sharp edges, faint fibers rising like veins beneath the surface. I traced one with my fingertip, grounding myself in its texture. Proof wasn't peace, it was survival in writing. Midnight came. I brewed tea just to hear the kettle hiss. The scent of it filled the room, familiar and thin, a ritual against helplessness. For months I had fought to be heard. Today I had been told to wait. Both demanded endurance, but waiting was quieter, and in some ways, crueler. I looked at the wall clock again. The hands had barely moved. Patience was measured in minutes, but forgiveness, if it ever came, was counted in years. At 1:00 a.m., I turned on the small lamp near the window. Outside, frost glazed the glass, catching light from the street like scattered shards. In the reflection, my face looked distant, steady. I had stopped trembling somewhere between despair and resolve. The witness had texted once, "Hold your silence. It speaks louder than outrage." I kept that line beside the folded notice, reading it again whenever doubt crept in. By dawn, the sky had paled into a reluctant gray. The courthouse loomed faintly, in the distance, a shadow against the horizon. I imagined the clerk already preparing new files, the judge rereading statements, my grandson rehearsing whatever defense remained. The scarf I'd dropped the previous day still hung from the back of the chair. I brushed my hand over it lightly. The fabric carried a faint scent of old paper and perfume, a blend of history and defiance. When I finally stood to leave, the notice lay centered on the table, perfectly aligned. One day deferred was not defeat. It was simply the breath before impact, the pause where justice gathered its weight. I took one last look at the clock. The second hand quivered near the mark. Tomorrow decides whose truth survives. When truth stands, applause feels like thunder. The air inside the courtroom was motionless, as if holding its breath. Every seat was filled. Even the corners near the exit were crowded with faces hungry for resolution. The flag behind the judge rippled faintly from the hum of the ceiling vents, its movement slow, almost ceremonial. The arbiter, seated 2 rows away, kept her eyes on the bench. The bailiff called for silence. Then came that moment, the one time stop's waiting for. The judge began to speak. Her voice carried the calm of someone used to endings. "This court finds the defendant guilty of financial fraud," she said. The words didn't echo. They landed. "Restitution is ordered in the full amount, $48,240, along with all associated legal costs. The record will remain sealed for privacy." A single pen clicked against the desk as the clerk signed the ruling sheet. The sound, small as it was, felt louder than the whispers that followed. Light poured in through the high windows, scattering across the marble floor. It hit my hands, trembling slightly, and reflected against the polished table before me. For years, I had imagined justice as fire. Instead, it arrived as light, quiet, deliberate, absolute. The crowd began to murmur. Some spoke in disbelief, others in satisfaction. The same mouths that once spread rumors now repeated my name differently, softer, uncertain. The first rumor had been reversed by record and gavel. He stood motionless beside his lawyer. My grandson, his shoulders smaller somehow, as though pride had slipped off him like an old coat. When our eyes met, there was no rage left, only disbelief, maybe regret, maybe too late. The judge continued, but her words blurred into the rhythm of the bailiff's footsteps, the sound of official closure. Pages shuffled, pens lifted. The arbiter exhaled quietly, relief balanced with restraint. "It's done," she whispered when I reached her side. "No," I said, still staring at the bench. "It's recorded, because justice isn't an ending. It's documentation of survival." I turned back toward the window, where light had begun to fade slightly. The court's flag fluttered once, the fabric catching gold along its edge. I could feel the day shifting from storm to stillness. For a moment I thought of the ledger, of every receipt I'd traced, every form I'd filed. $32,480 withdrawn, $11,200 redirected, $4,560 hidden. Numbers that once felt meaningless now stood as the bones of the truth, proof that even arithmetic can speak. The arbiter placed a copy of the ruling in my hands. The ink glinted where it was still wet, the edges of the page stiff from embossing. I traced the signature at the bottom, the judge's pen mark, a single line that ended what began years ago as silence. Behind us, the crowd began to move again. Conversations grew louder, the scrape of chairs, the click of heels, the soft creak of old doors surrendering to closure. Reporters gathered near the exit. One asked, "Do you have any statement?" I paused. "Only that truth doesn't need applause," I said. "It needs memory." She nodded, perhaps disappointed there was no outrage left to sell. The arbiter smiled faintly. "You handled it with grace." "Grace is just endurance after the storm," I replied. We stepped outside together. The winter light was sharp but clean, reflecting off the courthouse pillars. The same building that had once made me feel small now felt scaled to the size of my endurance. I inhaled deeply. The cold stung, but it reminded me I was still here, alive, unhidden, unsilenced. Inside, the judge's final words still lingered, etched into air and memory alike. I heard the bailiff's announcement faintly through the closing doors. "Court adjourned." The gavel lifted, then the gavel fell, like closure made of sound. After judgment, echoes are all that visit. The house stood quieter than I remembered. Dust clung to the light like hesitation, and every step I took stirred something half forgotten. The property agent moved through the hallway, clipboard in hand, cataloging what once was life into boxes labeled with numbers and dates. He called them possessions. I called them remains. The scent of old linen lingered, a blend of cedar, detergent, and time. It replaced the chaos that had once filled these rooms, raised voices, slammed doors, the heavy footsteps of distrust. The calm now felt both earned and undeserved. He asked, "Do you want to keep these?" On the table lay the photograph albums, corners frayed from decades of hands. I flipped one open. There he was, my grandson, 7 years old, missing a front tooth, smiling at the camera as if the world had only ever been kind. My breath caught between memory and mercy. "No," I said softly, "just that one." The agent nodded, writing something beside entry 14B on his inventory list. His pen scratched gently against the paper. "I'll arrange for the rest to be sent to storage." "Storage," I repeated, the word tasting empty. "Is that what we call love now?" He looked at me with a kind of practiced sympathy, the kind that never lingers long enough to bruise. "You've been through enough, ma'am. This part's just procedure." Procedure. Justice had procedures, too. So did betrayal. The protector arrived mid-afternoon, carrying another folder. Final clearances, signatures, estate transfer details. Her tone was gentle but brisk. "Everything checks out," she said. "Once you sign, it's officially yours again." I smiled faintly. "Yours again? It never felt like mine after they left." She hesitated before speaking. "Justice restores order, not family." Her honesty stung, but truth often does. I signed anyway. The paper trembled slightly under my pen, not from weakness, but from the weight leaving my body after too many years of carrying it. As the ink dried, I realized how small justice looks on paper. Thin, black lines sealing entire decades. I glanced toward the mantel. That single photograph stood there in its frame, wrapped with a blue ribbon he'd once tied around a school project. The ribbon had faded, but the knot held. I reached out, brushed away the dust. "You were never born to lie," I whispered. "You learned it from us." The window let in a slant of afternoon light, faint and forgiving. The curtains swayed slightly, stirring the scent of the house again. Linen and air, closure, and something like forgiveness. Boxes filled the living room in neat rows, each marked with names and numbers. The agent sealed one with tape, its sharp rip breaking the silence. "That's the last of it," he said. "We'll deliver by morning." "Leave that box," I said. "I'll take it myself." He nodded, perhaps relieved to leave emotion unboxed. When everyone was gone, I sat on the empty floor, surrounded by the hollow rhythm of my own breathing. The photograph still watched from the mantel, patient and kind. For years, I'd prayed for apology. Now I understood it was never coming. And somehow, that realization felt like peace. The house creaked as evening settled in. Justice had done its part. The rest was between ghosts and memory. I walked through each room one last time, touching walls that once held laughter, then secrets, then silence. The agent had packed everything, but the air itself refused to leave. It stayed, filled with what couldn't be folded or boxed. At the doorway I turned back. The photograph caught a glint of the setting sun, as if offering a last nod of grace. I left the key on the counter beside the signed documents, its metal cold against my palm. Some doors are better left open, I thought. Some stories never end. They just learn to breathe differently. I stepped outside. The scent followed me for a moment, linen, dust, and time, then disappeared into the wind. I didn't lock the door. I left the door unlocked on purpose. Closure arrived in an envelope marked undeliverable. It lay among the morning mail, bills, circulars, a local paper folded in half, ordinary things pretending the world still moved the same. But that envelope stopped me. My own handwriting stared back, the red stamp bleeding slightly where the ink had run. The letter I had sent months ago had come home, untouched. The paper inside felt cold when I pressed it between my fingers, as though it had traveled through silence instead of distance. Its edges curled from humidity, the return address crisp, accusing. I turned it over twice, searching for a trace of reason, but all I found was the echo of what I once needed to say. The postal witness, a young clerk with kind eyes, noticed my hesitation. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "some messages are for ourselves." He didn't mean it as comfort, but it landed that way. Outside the post office, winter light hung low, thin and unhurried. The wind carried the scent of ink and cardboard, faintly metallic, the kind that lingers on sorting tables. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket, feeling its shape settle against my ribs like a second heartbeat. I walked home slowly, past the same row of elm trees that had watched me age through seasons of anger and endurance. Each step counted like a ledger, totaling debts that could never be repaid. Inside, the house waited, quiet, almost reverent. I set the envelope on the table where the chair faced the mantel. His chair. The same one he used when arguing became too much effort. For a long time, I stared at it. The cushion had flattened over the years, the fabric fading into shades of surrender. I sat there, finally understanding how peace feels when it stops trying to prove itself. The air was steady, temperature even, the stillness not heavy but chosen. I unfolded the envelope again, tracing the crease where the seal remained unbroken. I had written that letter not to demand, not to accuse, but to forgive. I thought forgiveness needed a recipient. I was wrong. "Closure doesn't travel," I murmured. "It waits." I imagined him, wherever absence lives, reading it anyway. Perhaps not in this world, but in some quiet corner of memory where regrets keep their own addresses. The witness's words replayed in my mind. "Some messages are for ourselves." I smiled faintly. Then this one was right on time. I poured a cup of tea, steam rising like a soft exhale. The house, once filled with echoes of judgment, now carried warmth without noise. I felt it, not joy, not sorrow, something truer, balance. I unfolded the letter once more, careful not to tear the crease. The words inside were simple. "I forgive you, and I forgive myself." Nothing more, nothing less. The ink had faded slightly where the pen hesitated, as though forgiveness itself had paused before crossing the page. I folded it back, slower this time, deliberate, and placed it in the envelope again. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second a reminder that time doesn't heal, it records. I stood, crossed the room, and set the envelope beneath the clock. Not hidden, not displayed, just resting there, where silence could keep it company. Some returns are not loss. They are reminders that what comes back was never meant to leave in the first place. I exhaled once, steady, and let the quiet fill the room. The air felt warmer now, alive with something invisible, but whole. I left the lights off. The day didn't need illumination. It needed pause. I placed the envelope under the clock. He once said, "Truth fades." It only waited. A year had passed since the verdict, since the last signature turned grief into order. The hall was filled with faces both familiar and changed. Neighbors, advocates, strangers who had watched the storm from their windows. A memorial, they called it. But to me, it felt like the final chapter of a story that had rewritten itself. The council chair adjusted the microphone, its metallic echo slipping through the quiet. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the program leaflet, printed with names, dates, and a single line beneath his photograph, "In remembrance and in truth." The candlelight beside the frame flickered, casting a soft halo around his face. The same frame once sat under the harsh lights of a courtroom, held up as proof. Now it rested in peace, the wax dripping slowly down its side. The scent of melted candle mixed with the faint dust of folded papers, a reminder that light, too, leaves residue. When I stepped to the podium, the arbiter stood at the edge of the stage, her nod quiet, encouraging. She had been my compass through every interrogation, every form signed, every boundary drawn. Tonight, she was here not as counsel, but as witness. I took a breath. "When truth first arrived," I began, "it sounded like accusation, but over time, it became clarity." A murmur of recognition moved through the crowd. "He once said truth fades," I continued, but he was wrong. It doesn't fade, it waits. It waits for courage, for stillness, for the kind of silence that isn't fear anymore. The candle flickered again, the flame leaning toward the open window where morning light began to stretch across the room. I looked toward his photograph. "I forgave him," I said, "not because he asked, but because forgiveness doesn't belong to the guilty. It belongs to the free." The audience was silent. Some bowed their heads. Some watched me, eyes soft but unblinking. "Truth doesn't destroy families," I said, pausing as the words found their weight. "It rebuilds them. Differently, yes, but stronger. It makes room for the ones who choose to stay." From the back row, a young volunteer lit another candle, and its glow spread across the table where the memorial leaflets lay in neat rows. Each flame mirrored the next, small but steady. The arbiter stepped forward after my speech, whispering, "You gave them something to remember." "Not me," I said quietly. "The truth did." She smiled, her eyes glinting like glass touched by dawn. Same difference. I stepped down, moving closer to the photograph. The frame caught the light fully now, golden and forgiving. My reflection shimmered faintly across the glass, merging past and present in a single fragile image. A woman beside me placed her hand on my shoulder. "It takes strength to stand where you once broke." I nodded. "It takes truth to stay standing." Outside, the morning had fully arrived. The church bells from down the street rang, 3 short tones, then silence. The sound folded into the murmur of people leaving, footsteps soft against the wooden floor. I lingered. The wax on the table had hardened into thin, translucent layers. I traced one line of it, thinking of how time seals even pain if you let it cool long enough. From the corner, I could still hear the faint buzz of the microphone, its hum steady, alive. It reminded me that every voice, once released, keeps echoing somewhere. I turned back once more to the frame. The photograph was no longer a wound. It was a witness. Peace didn't feel loud or triumphant. It felt deliberate, like breath held and then finally released. The light shifted one last time across the glass, bright and certain. The frame caught the morning light again,